you can actually pass on these longevity genes through 2 generations, essentially, just by living long enough to take care of your grandchildren or your great-grandchildren. So in that way, women who live a long time can drive the evolution of their population towards a longer lifespan.
Welcome to the Brain Fit Podcast, where we share the cutting-edge science on how you can improve your memory and live a happier, healthier life. My name's Robert Love. I'm a neuroscientist, and I have a medical clinic in Florida where we are reversing Alzheimer's in our patients. Today on the Brain Fit Podcast, we have Dr. Melissa Ilardo, an evolutionary biologist at the University of Utah. In this interview, she shares the number one thing that women over age 60 can do to improve their health and the important role of grandmothers actually that's driving evolution right now. This was really interesting. So if you want to be healthy as you age, if you are a grandparent or you'd like to be a grandparent, or you are over age 60 and you just want to improve your health, you are going to love this episode. So here is Dr. Melissa Ilardo. Dr. Melissa Ilardo, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you.
So if you don't know her, she's done a great interview with Dr. Andrew Huberman, the world famous Stanford psychologist. So I appreciate you coming on this podcast and sharing your information with us.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
So you've studied some really interesting humans. And so you're an evolutionary biologist at the University of Utah. And so I'm really interested in a lot of things you're interested in, human biology, longevity. And I do some, quote, strange things like cold plunge or sauna, or I put myself in kind of stressful conditions, hoping that that's good for my body. And the research shows that it is. And this is your area of research. So I'd love to hear what you're up to. And then we were talking off camera. I really want to know about the female divers over 70. When you said that, I thought, oh my gosh, these women are doing extreme things over 70. So I'd love to hear about your research in that and how diving is affecting the brains and bodies of these women over 70.
Yeah, so I've worked with this really incredible population who live on a small island in Korea called Jeju, and the population of women is called the Haenyeo. And Haenyeo literally means sea women. And so these women are divers. They start when they're very young and they dive essentially throughout their lives. And so there are actually very few young women who are taking up this tradition. And so the current average age of the Haenyeo divers is around 70 years old. So I've met divers as old as 87 who have been diving their whole lives. Wow.
And then why is this skew old? Why are there fewer younger women interested in this?
It's honestly just a really hard life. So they work really hard. They're in the water. You mentioned cold plunges. The water that they're diving in is extremely cold. In the winter, it's about 50 degrees Fahrenheit at the surface. It can be snowing and they keep diving. So, that's cold. I'm kind of a wimp when it comes to cold water, but these women are very tough. And so, yeah, from what they tell me, it's just it's a tough life. And there aren't that many women who are interested in doing that compared to other opportunities that are available now.
And is this part of their profession, or is this a hobby? Are they diving for pearls or fish, or are they just saying, we're awesome women and we're going to dive in cold water because this is our lifestyle?
This is their job. This is how they support their families. This is how they send their kids to college. So they do everything from they dive to to harvest seaweed. They collect abalone. They'll dive for certain kinds of conch, things like that. So most of the seafood that's kind of, consumed on the island and even outside of that comes from these divers. So I actually know an incredible chef who works at a 3-star Michelin restaurant he runs a 3-star Michelin restaurant in Tokyo, and his abalone come from this island. So his abalone that he's serving to people in Tokyo at this fancy restaurant are coming from these incredible female divers.
Can you name drop the name of the restaurant and chef? One of my desires in life is to go eat at the very best restaurants in the world. I don't spend a lot of money on myself. Like, I live very simply, but I'm willing to pay for the best human experiences of food and art and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is Shinobu Namae. He's a very experimental chef doing a lot of really interesting things with sustainability. So it makes sense that he's, getting seafood from people like these. He works actually with the Ama divers in Japan, who have a very similar tradition. And the restaurant, I'm going to say it poorly, but is La Fervescence. It's a French restaurant in Tokyo. So I would highly recommend that.
Have you eaten there?
I have not, but we did cook some seaweed that we gathered while diving with the Ama divers in Japan. And I can tell you that that was incredible.
Oh,
I
fantastic.
got to be it's not often you get to be a sous chef for a Michelin starred chef. So that
No,
was
no. Did
definitely
you
a
say,
highlight for me.
did you say yes, chef, and wear the hat and salute and all that
Exactly.
stuff?
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. What a great treat.
Mhm.
And so these women are diving for their profession. Um, what have you found as far as the health of these women right now in the United States? I hope this isn't true for very much longer. I think we're the sickest nation in the world. We're one of the richest nations. Our lifespan has been decreasing for the last 5 to 10 years. It's really scary, and dementia has been on the rise. And so, but I think a lot of it's because we're living such a sedentary, and I want to say kind of wimpy, soft existence where we want to stay in air conditioning at 65, 70 degrees all day. No one wants to exercise. They want their, I was working with someone and they said, I get my coffee delivered via Uber Eats. And I thought, oh my gosh, you can't even make your own coffee. And so I'm just kind of concerned we're getting really soft as humans here in the US with all of our creature comforts. And these women sound just super tough and healthy.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. Not only, do they potentially have a longer lifespan, but they definitely have a longer health span. So, when you see an 87-year-old woman jump off a boat that's still moving to go diving for the next 5 hours in frigid waters, it's very impressive. And it's, that's the kind of health span that I would certainly want for myself. And we do think that this is a combination of training effects or physiological effects, so things that we can do ourselves, which is exciting, but then also some genetic adaptations that we think enable them to dive better and more safely. And so the training effects that we saw were that these women from a lifetime of diving have lower resting heart rates. And so when you dive, when you hold your breath and you submerge yourself in water, when you're doing that cold plunge, as long as you're holding your breath, your body responds through something called the mammalian dive reflex. And a component of this is that your heart rate drops. So not only does their heart rate drop, but their heart rate actually drops much faster than people who haven't been training. So we think that, this kind of beneficial cardiovascular effect is coming from a lifetime of training as a diver. Whether that's coming from holding their breath or, they're swimming in rough ocean waters, it's a very active form of diving. It's not like being in a pool and holding your breath. But somehow it's having this really incredible effect on their hearts and their cardiovascular health.
So they have lower resting heart rates. Do they also have lower blood pressure? So all the things I would expect: lower blood pressure, lower risk of stroke, lower risk of heart disease, these sorts of things.
So we saw that actually, it's interesting you mentioned stroke because we also identified a genetic adaptation in the population. So when you dive, one of the things that happens, again, as a consequence of this dive reflex, is your blood pressure increases. And this can increase cerebral perfusion. It keeps, the essential blood at the core of your body rather than, in the periphery of your body, like your fingertips and your toes, that don't need that oxygen quite as badly. But these women dive throughout their pregnancies. And so the adaptation that we see in these women is that their blood pressure does not increase as much. So they have lower diastolic blood pressure during diving because of a genetic variation that's been evolving in that population.
Oh, wow. That's so interesting.
If you suffer from brain fog or if you'd like to increase your mental clarity, I have a great supplement called Neuro Plus Brain and Focus Formula that can be really helpful to you. This is a combination of 7 powerful ingredients that are shown to improve memory, improve focus, improve attention, reduce brain fog, and increase mental clarity. I really like to take this in the afternoon if I'm feeling afternoon brain fog, or if I'm feeling tired. This helps give my brain more energy so I can continue to work during the day. This works really well in the morning with morning coffee and lion's mane. This also works in the afternoon alone or with lion's mane. Do not take this at night. It is very stimulating. It's very powerful. This can help reduce or even end brain fog in as little as 3 days. The average is about 2 weeks, and it comes with a 6-month unconditional money-back guarantee, so you can try it risk-free. So if you want to try this risk-free, go to robertlove.net and then click the link that says Neuro Plus Brain and Focus Formula.
And then how does this affect stroke?
So yeah, we noticed that in the island of Jeju, they have one of the highest rates of hypertension in Korea, but one of the lowest stroke mortality. And obviously those things are normally quite correlated. And so we think this, again, is maybe a result of this genetic variation that's protecting them as they're diving throughout pregnancy. Because the particular gene that's been evolving has an effect on the blood vessels themselves and inflammation in the blood vessels. And so we think that it may be protective against stroke as well. And we recently did some work where we showed that people from Jeju, so this is divers and non-divers because they all have the same genes, have a lower risk of stroke that can't be explained by any other environmental factors. So we have how much sodium they ate in the last 24 hours, how many cigarettes they smoke, how much alcohol they consume. All of these potential risk factors cannot explain this difference. And so we're doing some follow-up work now to see if we can really get to the exact genetic mechanism that may be protecting them from stroke.
Fantastic. And so if they have lower risk of stroke, a stroke is a form of dementia on its own, but it's also a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease, just like traumatic brain injury, or pretty much anything. This is simplistic. Pretty much anything that hurts the brain increases the risk of Alzheimer's disease because you're potentially losing a chunk of function. Can you help us understand how much less a risk of stroke and less a risk of other forms of dementia this population has?
So we haven't looked at dementia yet, just because we haven't had the data available. This island has been kind of neglected in studies that have been done in Korea. I think there's growing interest in the island because it is this genetically distinct population. The people of this island have their own language that's distinct from Korean. They have a very different culture. So there's a lot of reason to kind of look into this island and what's going on there, especially from a genetic perspective. But so the data that we had already that we were able to use to kind of look at this question showed that they have about a 30% decrease in the risk of having a family member who's had a stroke. So we really want to kind of get in there and also measure the exact effects on the vasculature. Can we see a difference in inflammation or things like that? Can we see this influencing their pregnancy outcomes? Can we see it influencing their dementia and Alzheimer's rates? These are data that we don't have yet, but we're really excited to collect.
Excellent. That's so interesting. So about a 30% decreased risk of stroke compared to
mainland Koreans, even when accounting for all other factors. So, it's not that this is an older population or a younger population or, any of these other potential risk factors. It's just being from Jeju, which we think may suggest that it's something genetic.
And so I want to help this be practical for people here. I want to understand more what your research shows as far as the effect of diving. What is this doing to their brains? When I was, I've been in my late 20s, I was listening to a self-development program, and it suggested holding your breath, specifically holding your breath underwater. And what they shared was, I don't know the exact science behind this, but what they shared was that by holding your breath, when your brain becomes deprived of oxygen or depleted in oxygen, your capillaries will expand to try to get more oxygen to the brain because it prioritizes the brain amongst, my hand. And then with those dilated capillaries, that helps increase kind of cleansing of the brain, right? Wider capillaries can get more plaque and toxins out of the brain. And so they said a great way to improve your brain health is to kind of hold your breath and challenge your capillaries to open, and that'll help flush the brain. And then, Wim Hof, who is famous for holding his breath. For those of you who don't know, you can search Iceman or Wim Hof and you'll see him like doing some advanced breathing, holding his breath, jumping into cold water. He does the holding your breath and then the benefits of doing the Wim Hof technique. I want to get your thoughts on that. And then, this program also said, and a really good idea is to hold your breath underwater because there's pressure underwater. And so holding your breath underwater is extra good. I don't know what this book was. There was a story about someone who would hold his breath underwater and have like a whiteboard underwater because he had really good thoughts underwater. So he'd hold his breath and then take notes underwater for 2 minutes and come back and breathe and go back down there. So I'd love to hear about the impact of breath holding and potentially breath holding underwater, what that is potentially doing to the brain.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of things that you just said that I want to talk about.
Please.
So the one thing I would say is that I think, people ask me a lot about the pressure of being underwater, but actually in terms of, so if you hold your breath, you trigger to an extent this dive reflex that I talked about, where it's what you're describing as well, where you're getting, you have less blood in your fingers and toes, more blood in your brain because of how the blood is kind of preferentially distributed. And that is exaggerated by being in water. But the reason that it's exaggerated in water isn't actually the pressure. It's the presence of something cold on your face to trigger the nerves in your face that are related to this response. So it's interesting. We have this kind of built-in trigger. What's cool about that is that you can actually trigger this just by putting a cold towel on your face. So a lot of times in the lab, rather than having people put their face in a bowl of cold water, which is what we did, they'll just put a cold towel on people's face and ask them to hold their breath. And it triggers the same response, which is kind of incredible. And what you were saying about, you're getting, an increase of blood flow to the brain. There's all these potential benefits of that. There's, of course, risks depending on how long you do it. Anything like this, if you do it too long, your brain starts to not have enough oxygen to function. And we don't actually have a good way of telling when oxygen is too low. As humans, we can tell when carbon dioxide is building up. That's what makes us feel like we have to breathe, but we don't know when our oxygen is too low. And that's how people die from, carbon monoxide poisoning. So it's a delicate balance between holding your breath for an appropriate amount of time and holding your breath for, I think the new breath hold record is I want to say it's 13 minutes without supplemental oxygen. And I think someone just did almost a half an hour with breathing pure oxygen prior to holding their breath. Absolutely incredible.
I would like to thank our sponsor, Dr. Love's MagnaSleep. This is my new magnesium supplement I designed with Dr. Kareem Zamori. This is the best magnesium supplement out there in the market. Let me explain why. First of all, it's got the right forms of magnesium. It's got magnesium threonate, which is really good for brain health. It's a smaller form of magnesium that can cross into the brain. Magnesium glycinate, very absorbable, great for overall body health. But it's also got magnesium malate, which is good for the muscles, and magnesium taurate, which is good for your heart. So it's got multiple forms of magnesium that are great for your overall body. And it comes with vitamin D and boron. Vitamin D and boron work with magnesium to really improve bone health. So that makes magnesium more valuable to your bones, all those three together. And it's got shilajit, which increases absorption. So I designed this to be the very best magnesium available to you today, and it is on sale right now. This is great for improving sleep, but also improving mood, reducing stress and anxiety, improving bone health, improving muscle health, improving energy function. So many benefits of magnesium, and you can try it absolutely risk-free. It comes with an unconditional 6-month money-back guarantee. If you don't absolutely love it, I'm happy to refund your money, but I want you to try this because so many people get a great benefit of magnesium, and this is the best magnesium available. So if you want to get this on sale, click the link below or go to robertlove.net to try it risk-free. I love this. I love the Boost Oxygen. I'm not sponsored by them, but I love this. I love this throughout the day. I love this before or during exercise. I recover so much faster from exercise. I used to be really tired after exercise. My thought was that my muscles are soaking up all the glucose and all of the oxygen, and my brain is just tired. But I feel so much better with this afterwards. I want to highlight something you said so people understand this. This is really interesting. And so our desire to breathe, the sensation that we need to breathe, it's not the lack of oxygen, it's the buildup of CO2 in our blood.
So that's why it can be particularly dangerous to hyperventilate before holding your breath. So if you're, breathing really fast, you're breathing out a lot of carbon dioxide, you can trick your body into holding your breath longer because, that carbon dioxide isn't built up in the way that it should be. But obviously that can be dangerous because, like I said, we don't know when our oxygen has run out. And in fact, these competitive breath hold divers or people who are holding their breath for a really long time will count the number of, there's something called involuntary breath movements. So your body starts to say this is getting bad. And it tries to make you breathe because of this buildup of carbon dioxide. And they will count the number and they'll know, okay, after 7 of these or however many of these, I'm going to pass out. So, when I get
7.
to 6, I better take a breath.
Well, I'm lucky if I get to 2. Usually.
Wow. Okay. So you're one of these. That's impressive.
I feel 1.5 or 2. I'm laying on my floor. So if I do pass out, I'll be able to breathe.
Yeah. It becomes more dangerous when you're doing that underwater.
Yeah, I understand. I want to ask you about the keto diet and breath holding. And then I don't know if any of these women speak to the experience. I've had almost a psychedelic experience when doing kind of Wim Hof and breath holding. It's really fascinating. I feel it I don't know what's causing that. If it's a large amount of oxygen or my blood vessels are so dilated, and then I breathe and then it just kind of floods. And so Tim Ferriss talked about breath holding in keto, and he was just able to hold his breath a whole lot longer. And I found that was true when I was doing the Wim Hof method. And then, so I'd breathe 30 times deeply and then hold my breath for as long as I could. And when I was in ketosis, I could hold my breath for substantially longer. I was wondering about the mechanism of that.
Yeah, so I'm not sure of the exact mechanism, but it does make sense in terms of when you are in ketosis, your metabolism is functioning in a different way. So, what you need to input to survive is very different. And that's why, what you're eating is going to react differently than when you're not in ketosis. And it makes sense then that what you're breathing is also, or not breathing, is also going to be influenced by the change in your metabolism. But I don't know the exact mechanism of that.
My guess is it's the type of respiration. So I think my guess is ketogenic metabolism doesn't need oxygen or as much oxygen versus just regular glucose metabolism requires oxygen to make energy. I'm guessing that's part of the factor.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Did any of your participants have any of your participants or any of the people you studied talked about kind of psychedelic like states when inhaling oxygen after long dives or long breath holds?
It's an interesting question. It's not one that I've asked, but I would be very excited to ask. I do wonder to what extent, so one thing about the diving that these women do is they tend to be kind of shorter dives, but then with a very short recovery.
Oh yeah. How long are the dives? I'm sorry. I want to understand what these women are going through.
Yeah, exactly. So we actually recently kind of put sensors on these women. And now, the caveat to all of this is that we're studying them at 65, 70, 75, 87 years old. So how they're diving now may be quite different from how they were diving when they were 20 years old or something like that. But what we saw was that on average, they were diving for about 30 seconds at a time. But then they were recovering for less than that amount of time at the surface before they were diving again. And I actually was lucky enough to get to dive with them recently, at which point I realized that all of our data, I think, are actually wrong because when these women, I was diving with a snorkel. I come up to the surface, I take a few gasping breaths, then I'm breathing through my snorkel to recover as I'm looking where I'm going to dive next. And it was as I was doing this that I was looking around, and these women, even when they're not diving, they're holding their breath because they don't have snorkels. So when they're looking where they're going to dive next, they're holding their breath. So I think we vastly underestimated actually how much of their day they're spending holding their breath, which is incredible because it's already the percentage of time they hold their breath, according to our initial study, puts them somewhere between sea lions and gray seals.
Interesting. So we have a true scientist here, ladies and gentlemen, who say, my data might be incorrect.
Yes, yes. Acknowledge the flaws.
there's a great adage, science moves ahead, you're one funeral at a time. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people who claim to be scientists who are stuck in their opinions rather than looking at the current data. I think one of the best example is fluoride. Someone will say, fluoride's great in the water. It's been shown for the last 50 years. Like, well, did you see the new research? And they don't look at the new research. Like, no, 50 years of data shows it's good. Well, that data is actually not that good. And the current science shows it's actually really bad. And here's X, Y, and Z. It's fascinating. And so I want to talk to you about bradycardia and babies. I had a question about that. So one of the first experiments we did in biology in college was we did we'd stimulate basically the bradycardia, the diving response with exactly what you said, cold water, and we'd lean forward, we'd stick our face in cold water, and our blood pressure would drop, and our heart rate would drop. And we were just fascinated by this. We were just like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. And they said, why do you think this evolved? Like, well, I don't know, but this is really cool, right? We make our face cold, and our heart rate drops. This is wild. And I heard recently that there are populations of humans who are exposing their babies to kind of cold to make them more resilient. And so I don't know if this is true. So they said they leave their children out at night when it's cold to help them become more temperature resistant, or they'd expose them to cold on their face to expose them to the elements, compared to just leaving them in their crib all bundled up, perfectly temperatured all the time. I just thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about that specifically, and I certainly wouldn't condone anyone leave their child in the cold view without knowing more information. But I do think that you're pointing to something really interesting, which is that we generally in my lab study both physiological adaptation. The word adaptation is used a lot to mean different things. So there's physiological adaptation, which is like training effects, or exposure effects, which I'll talk about more in a second. And then there's genetic adaptation, which happens over generations to actually change the genes in a given population. And so we are extremely adaptable from a physiological perspective beings. We can adapt to cold climates, hot climates, high altitudes, diving. Like if you do a crash course in diving, you can get your breath hold from 30 seconds to 2 minutes in a week. If you learn the right techniques, like I've had friends who have done that. So there's an incredible amount of training that we can do to change our bodies in a very short period of time. And cold and heat are two examples where there's been a huge amount of research done on how to do this efficiently and quickly. And I know that, anyone who can, I took a ski trip in the middle of summer to South America. It was our summer in North America, their winter. And it was like the coldest I've ever felt skiing, even though the temperatures weren't that low. And it's just because I was coming from heat adaptation in Salt Lake City, Utah, to a very cold climate with no chance to adapt myself to those colder temperatures. So yeah, a lot of these changes, there's protocols you can look up for how you can adapt yourself most efficiently to cold or to heat or things like that. And there certainly could be health benefits to both of those things.
Like to thank our sponsor, Danger Coffee. So coffee is terrific for your brain. I like to drink it almost every day. Some days I drink matcha, but most days I'm drinking coffee, organic coffee. Coffee improves focus, memory, and attention. Coffee can help reduce the accumulation of amyloid plaque in the brain, and coffee is really good for your gut bacteria. But it's really important to drink a high-quality coffee that is organic and mold-free. This is the highest quality coffee that I'm drinking. I really like this one. This one's my favorite because I know it's certified mold-free. This is a really big deal. So organic is not enough. A lot of organic coffee can have mold in it. This is coffee by Dave Asprey. You see I have his book right here. Dave Asprey is one of the world's leading biohackers. I've been following his stuff for years. He makes the highest quality products, especially the coffees. This is certified mold-free and it's organic and it tastes great. If you want to try this, we got a great coupon for you. So you can get this at the link below and you can try this absolutely risk-free. I've had 2 cups of this today. This is really great quality coffee, great tasting. I like to blend it with MCT oil and a little bit of monk fruit sugar, and that's fantastic. By the way, I learned about MCT oil from Dave Asprey, and so he's the reason why I make my coffee the way that I do. So if you like coffee, give this a try. So you said something interesting that I think a lot of us observe but don't necessarily put our finger on, which is the climate we live in affects our ability to withstand those temperatures. And so it can be as short as a couple months of summer or a month of summer will affect how cold we get. So people born and raised in Minnesota, I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. They'll come there and be like, this isn't cold, and they don't wear a jacket all winter because they're just not cold. I went to a wedding in Southern California in the summer, and we're out on the beach at night, and then the Californians are wearing like down jackets. And my sister lives in Boston. She's like, this is hilarious. It's I don't know, it's 60, and they're all the Southern Californians are all shivering in their puffy jackets, and I'm thinking I'm not wearing a coat on the beach in Southern California in the summer. This is just silly. But they just get cold easier because they're nice temperature all the time. And so from your experience as an evolutionary biologist, what it is being in a really comfortable temperature all the time, like in the United States, for people who are indoors most of the time. I recently heard that we spend 80 to 95% of our days inside, so we're not exposed to the elements or the sun. What do you think this is doing to our health as a population?
From an evolutionary perspective, having temperature control, living comfortably in this way, has just removed any kind of selective pressure related to temperature. There are still many ways in which, we as a species could be evolving because there's other stressors in our environment. But yeah, it's certainly not like, let's say 30,000 years ago when a cold day could mean the difference between life or death. There's also potential, like training or physiological factors to consider. But from a purely evolutionary perspective, yeah, it does mean that we have removed that as a potential driver of natural selection for the most part. I will say that when there are these, bizarre temperature events like the Arctic vortex or polar vortex or things like that, people still die, which shows you that, we're adaptable, but we're still delicate little creatures.
And I think we're becoming more delicate because we're not exposing ourselves to pain. So David Goggins talks about how, so he's famous for putting himself in extreme conditions and doing very hard things, and he's got extreme mental toughness, which if you're in business or you're in science, and we're used to rejection and competition, like we need to be able to do painful things and hard things, and our brain needs to be able to overcome these things. So I took a cold shower this morning. I do that every morning, and I'm standing there. I'm like, this is uncomfortable. I'm okay being uncomfortable, right? I'm comfortable being uncomfortable. We'll do a cold plunge. I'm comfortable being uncomfortable. Mark Zuckerberg said that. He said, I make myself do uncomfortable things because frankly, he's running a multi-billion-dollar company. I got to be able to put myself in difficult situations and be okay with it. And my concern is that, especially Gen Z, they seem so emotionally fragile and not resilient, relative to, when Gen X was being raised, they were tough as nails, right? The Gen X were the MTV generation, and the Gen Z seems to just be really mentally fragile. I'm concerned because they're not putting themselves in uncomfortable situations, at least not traditional uncomfortable. I think their uncomfort is someone says something negative about them on Instagram, which does have an impact on their emotions, but it's very strange for that to be the source of human discomfort, right? Usually it's physiological, or at least some physiological, right? You got to do something hard with your body. And so I think this is, I'm interested what the comfort lifestyle is doing to our mental toughness or our mental resilience.
Yeah. To play devil's advocate, just because I have two incredible Gen Z PhD students, I think that, one thing that's important to keep in mind is that studies have shown that self-control is a limited resource. And so we only have a certain amount of, kind of like discomfort in us. And I would say that for me, the world feels exceptionally stressful right now. And so maybe there is a certain amount of, they're dealing with a lot of different things that, so they're kind of, their toughness may be used up on some of these factors that weren't as much of a factor for Gen X or things like that. Although I do think, I recently heard Michael Easter talk about the comfort crisis, which kind of gets to a lot of what you're saying. And it is interesting, no matter how comfortable we are, we do find things to complain about. And we do find we kind of just change our baseline of where our comfort threshold is, which is why it's, of course, good to push ourselves. Because then, once that threshold is higher, we can do a lot more uncomfortable things. But yeah, I have hope in Gen Z because at least my students are incredible and they're pushing themselves in many different ways.
And you're dealing with, the cream of the crop, the top students who competed to be there. Graduate school is highly selective. And so you're dealing with some of probably the most healthiest, most resilient, hardworking people of that generation. And I love the research you cited from Roy Baumeister about glucose being the source of decision-making, of self-restraint, right? If we have low glucose, I'm really grumpy and I'm more likely to reach for candy, more likely to say something unkind, much harder to practice self-restraint, right? But when we're well-fed, when I'm well-rested, I'm not a pleasant person when I don't sleep well, right? I just feel I'm getting grumpy at anybody. And so I think it's so important what you highlighted, that if we're going to make good decisions, if we're going to be happy and healthy people, we got to make sure that we're resourced with healthy food, and with sleep. I think it was in the Roy Baumeister book that he talked about this really interesting effect. It's called the what the hell effect, which was someone's restricting their eating. They're saying, okay, I'm not going to eat any M&Ms, but you put them in a room with a bowl of M&Ms, and so okay, your job is to not eat any. And then I'm kind of mixing studies, but the general idea is that if people who are trying to not eat any at all, and then they eat one, they say, well, I've already eaten one. What the hell? I might as well eat the whole bowl. Right. So if they broke their fast, they might as well just eat the whole thing. Whereas if you put them in the room with M&Ms, say, look, have as many M&Ms as you want. There's no restraint. They'll eat 5. But if you say you're not allowed to eat any, then they eat the whole bowl. Cause like, oh, what the hell? I already broke my thing I said I was going to do today. So I might as well eat as much candy as I want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting. I had a roommate in college who who used some of those kinds of studies as a reason to indulge in whatever sweets she was craving prior to taking an exam, because she said, I don't want to waste any of my self-control on not eating sweets before I take a difficult test.
What great rationale. I'm using all of my willpower. That's what it's called. It's the book Willpower by Roy Baumeister. I'm using all my willpower to study, so I'm allowed to eat any candy I want.
Yeah. That was her. She's been very successful, so I guess it worked for her.
That's brilliant. I love that.
If you or someone you love has Alzheimer's or another form of dementia, I want you to know there is hope. Alzheimer's is preventable and it is even reversible. In fact, we are reversing Alzheimer's in my medical clinic here in Florida. My partner and medical director is Dr. Josh Hellman, a medical doctor trained at Harvard who specializes in preventing and reversing Alzheimer's disease, and we are reversing Alzheimer's in our patients. If you'd like to learn more about working with us to both prevent Alzheimer's and even reverse Alzheimer's and reverse memory loss associated with other forms of dementia, we would love to hear from you and send you some free information so you can learn what we are doing and see if it's a fit for you to come down and work with us in our clinic. We also work with other clinics around the country to help patients both prevent Alzheimer's as well as to reverse Alzheimer's and reverse memory loss associated with dementia. So if you'd like to learn more, go to brainpowerclinics.com. Go to brainpowerclinics.com and then enter your information. We will send you some free information, and then we hope to work with you if we can be helpful to you to help you prevent and reverse Alzheimer's disease.
So Dr. Ilardo, you are a evolutionary biologist, and you've studied populations. Are there populations of humans who have evolved to live longer here on planet Earth?
It's a really interesting question, because up until recently, I would have said no, because I would have said that that's not possible. So there are these blue zones where we have indications that populations live longer. But from an evolutionary perspective, it's kind of like once you've passed reproductive, your reproductive time, what's the point of keeping you around? You're not having more children. You've survived. You made it. You're among the fittest. The survival of the fittest. You're there. So how could you ever evolve longevity? Because there's just really no value in passing on your genes past a certain point. You're not having more children. However, there's something called the grandmother hypothesis that I find super interesting, especially because it really centers women in driving the evolution of our species. And so the idea behind this is that women who take care of their grandchildren are easing the burden of their children. They're easing that parenting burden. And so they're enabling their children to have more children, and they're making sure that those children are healthier and live longer, live happier, healthier lives themselves. And so the idea there is that you can actually pass on these longevity genes through, 2 generations, essentially, just by living long enough to take care of your grandchildren or your great-grandchildren or things like that. So in that way, women who live a long time can drive the evolution of their population towards a longer lifespan. So this is something that I'm really curious to look into with some of these blue zone populations. There are populations within the U.S. who have been noted to have extraordinarily long lifespans. There have been some indications that this is genetic. So it's really exciting to think about the fact that maybe it is evolution, and specifically this role of grandmothers, long living women taking care of their grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and so on, that could be driving a population towards a longer life.
This is so interesting. Can we dive a little bit deeper into this? I got a whole bunch of questions.
Absolutely.
And so what has been found with grandmothers who have more contact with their children? Have you found good data to show that these women live longer? Or what have you found so far?
So I haven't done this research myself, but I'm aware of some studies that have looked at, again, so mothers whose their mothers are involved in the lives of the children. It's hard to phrase, but grandmothers essentially who play a role. Not only do those parents on average have more children, but the children are more likely they have a higher rate of survival. And the thought is just that the presence of the grandmother relieves the mother of a burden, making it easier for her to have more children. And then also make sure that, they're more cared for, they're receiving more attention. They're all of these things that's contributing to them surviving.
Okay, so I get it. So the grandmother is driving the more children from her daughter, her son, by
Exactly.
being there to take care of them and make it possible so that they can have more children.
Exactly. Yeah.
I
So
I
it's, I
got
mean, it's interesting because it's like, from an evolutionary perspective, if we take a step back, you really haven't succeeded until you've had grandchildren. And I say this as someone who's
yeah,
intentionally
sure.
childless. So I'm an evolutionary failure, and I'm okay with that. But you have to, your children have to be able to have children in order for your genes to get passed on. So the more grandchildren you have, the more your genes are spreading through the population. So if you live long enough to help take care of those grandchildren and make sure that they do well and they're healthy and they're, reproductively fit, then you've passed on more of your long-living genes.
So I have a funny joke for you. You mentioned you're an evolutionary failure as an evolutionary biologist. So I went to Swarthmore for undergrad, and each department would have their own T-shirts. And every year, the department would make their own humorous T-shirt. And some of them would actually probably be not allowed right now. Some of them had some what would now be offensive jokes 20 years later. But the biologists one year was biologist's to-do list. Number 1, sex. Number 2, death. Right.
Yep,
So that's
yep.
it's like, okay, this is all we're here to do. We're just here to have sex, and then we're supposed to die. That's what
Yeah,
we're here
yeah, something like that.
for. So there's something really interesting. I think it's in primate research, the anti-effect or the ant effect, where if you're an ant, then you have practice raising a baby primate, baby chimp, and so when you have children, you're more likely to succeed because you've gotten practice, right? So if you're a woman and your sister has a child, you help take care of that child. Then when you have a child, you're a lot less scared. You know what to do, and you've had practice and so forth. And so by bringing the grandmother into the situation, this is bringing in someone who's experienced with children and be like, look, daughter, you don't need to freak out just because the baby's cried for 5 minutes. We can relax. You go eat some healthy food. I'll hold the baby. It'll be fine. And I imagine that's very helpful and comforting. There's data to show that humans, parents live within, I don't know, it's either 5 miles or 20 minutes of at least one set of grandparents. Most of them, it's like 50 or 80%, because they want the free childcare, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's just interesting to think about, of course you have to live long enough to do that, to provide that knowledge, to pass that on. And these networks of women supporting each other, it's interesting to think that, like, also, as an aunt, I can also contribute to the evolutionary fitness of my nieces and nephews. And so in that way, even though I don't have children of my own, I can still play a role. So
this is so interesting. And I imagine there's also tremendous benefit to the grandmothers and grandfathers, to whatever role they play, to helping with the grandchildren. That's got to be very emotionally nourishing for them and have all kinds of health benefits.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's just so much research showing that as we age, social interaction, as I'm sure you know, just contributes so positively to health. And I was recently at a conference where someone was talking about data where they were able to actually measure changes in gene expression related to inflammation just from a few hours of social interaction. So, just being around other people, and you can imagine, especially being around young people and feeling inspired and loving towards those people is going to reduce inflammation and protect you from all kinds of potential adverse health effects.
Can you share that data point again? I was taking a note. So just a few hours of social contact has what impact?
So it changes the gene expression. So our genes are kind of a blueprint of what's going on in our body. But the speed at which that blueprint is read can change. Instructions can be read faster, slower, not at all. And these are called changes in gene expression. So you have the gene, that's not going to change, but how quickly it's read can change. And so there are genes related to dealing with inflammation. So, if you increase the gene expression of a particular gene, maybe it reduces the amount of inflammation. And they found that interacting socially did exactly that. It increased, I don't remember, offhand the exact gene or, but it showed that this social interaction actually changed how the genes were expressed in a way that reduced inflammation.
So this is really important for everyone to understand, because inflammation is one of the primary risk factors of Alzheimer's disease, one of the primary driving factors of aging, and one of the biggest risk factors for pretty much every chronic disease. I want to say every, but there might be one that it's not. But my goodness, almost so many different chronic diseases, your risk is increased with higher levels of inflammation. And so the idea of just a couple hours with friends, I'm guessing that has to be not stressful interaction, right?
Yeah,
Right.
hopefully friends that you actually enjoy spending time with,
Right.
not people you're shouting at.
Family time at Christmas could be a little stressful depending upon your family, but spending time with people you love in a non-stressful way lowers inflammation. That's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
So for those of you at home, spend time with those you love. It's not just enjoyable, it's actually really good for your health. Your DNA is telling you this is what you want. And doing the grandfather thing, you get a 2-for-1, right? You're helping the downline of your genes succeed. You're allowing for more children because you're taking away some of the burden, and you're getting that social contact that is so good for your overall health.
It's exciting because it's, I think from an evolutionary perspective, we're used to seeing ourselves as kind of these passive recipients of evolution. It's happening, our genes are there, we can't change them. There's this concept of genetic determinism, like my genes determine my health and there's nothing I can do about it. But really, there's so much we can do. And so, it's exciting to think of ourselves as actively involved in our own health, in our own genetics, through the behaviors that we do and how that changes, again, the reading of this blueprint rather than the blueprint itself.
So I'd love to ask you more about this. What are some of the things that that people can do to have healthier gene expression?
I think there's been a lot of, it's unfortunately most of the work looking at, this is kind of all falls under the umbrella of epigenetics. So changes that we can incur in our lifetime or confer in our lifetime. And a lot of the work, unfortunately, has focused on things that we do wrong. So, trauma is really bad for gene expression, of genes that are harmful for us, starvation, all of these, a lot of the focus has been on disease because that's how a lot of medical science works. But I have seen some studies looking at things like meditation, yoga, retreats, just kind of having time for yourself and, social interaction. All of these things seem to increase the expression of genes related to things like telomerase, which is basically, adding protective content to the ends of our genes to protect them from damage from UV, things like that. So, there's a lot of really, as you might intuit, the things that feel like they're healthy for us often have these protective effects in terms of turning on the right genes and turning off the ones that could harm us.
So some of the things you mentioned that are really good, not only they're just healthy practices, but also good for gene expression. You mentioned yoga, meditation, socializing. What about exercise?
I think, with exercise, it's so complicated because it depends on what kind of exercise you're doing, how long you're doing it, how intensely you're doing it. I think in general, studies just show that almost any amount of exercise is really good for you because it's producing more blood vessels. It's, bringing oxygen to parts of your body that aren't getting it if you're just sitting around. So I think, there's just so many benefits of exercise. And in terms of gene regulation, it's a little bit of a more complicated story. Because, one of the things with exercise too is that actually it's kind of the damage that you do through exercise that can then give you benefit. So, like oxidative stress, this is one of the things that we generally try to avoid by taking vitamin C and, doing all these things to protect ourselves from reactive oxidative species, they're called. And the problem is that if you do that after exercise, you're actually missing some of the benefits of exercising because your body needs that stress to kind of repair itself. So yeah, I think with exercise, it's a little complicated, but there's so many benefits to exercise generally.
Anything else you want to add to this list? So I hope all those watching do at least one of these things or try them out the next week to improve your gene expression, and just socializing can lower your inflammation. That can slow down aging. I think we all know people who live a very stressed life and maybe a rather lonely life who have aged poorly, and those who live a very blessed life surrounded by loved ones and lower stress, they're aging fantastically. And so what else can we add to this list? Or what else would you like to share about this?
I would say that I hope that there are more studies so we can add more things to this list, because again, there's been just such a focus on pathology and disease and all the things that we're doing wrong. And I think we need to kind of flip that switch in research or flip that script and talk about the things that we can do help ourselves and to build resilience. So I'm not currently aware of other things on the list, but I hope that we will know more soon.
And who, just so people understand how science gets funded, who funds these types of studies?
Well, that's a big part of the challenge, is that it's a lot easier to get funding for disease research than it is for resilience research. So yeah, that's a lot of this. It comes from the National Institute of Health, which ironically, despite health being in the title, focuses much more on disease.
That's it's important for people to know, because people are like, why aren't we doing this research? Well, right now, for whatever reason, I won't go down this political rabbit hole, but for whatever reason, government is structured to basically fund a lot of pharmaceutical research. And a lot of, and because there's money attached to it. So you got big pharma talking to the FDA saying, Joe, it'd be great if you gave us some more billions of dollars to research some molecules that might be a drug later, because then we're going to sell the drug for a lot of money. There's very few people walking up there in their yoga clothes saying, you know what, if you gave me some money, I could investigate the impact of yoga on healthy adults. And so that way people would live longer, happier, healthier lives and be more productive, which would be good for the whole society at large, right? I think the healthier we are, the more productive we are. I think most humans want to be productive. I think very few want to just sit and watch TV and eat candy. I think people want to have meaning and purpose. And the healthier we are, the easier it is to do these sorts of things. And so right now it's up to researchers to write compelling grants to try to say, please, can we have some money to study wellness and what's keeping us healthy? There was a great book by Dr. Daniel Goleman, Emotional Intelligence. He talked about his mother. This is back to the grandmother hypothesis. His it's tangential to that. His mother adopted like a 9-year-old girl from Japan, or a 9-year-old orphan, when she was in her, say, late 80s, and taking care of that girl kept her young for like the next 10 years. Right. So when older adults are around younger people, it keeps them younger. And it also gave her purpose. A lot of retired people struggle with this problem, a lack of purpose, because a lot of people retire and then they say, what do I do? I've already played golf today. I guess I'm going to sit and watch television. That's not exceptionally fulfilling. Raising children, or sometimes it's raising animals, or being part of a charity, or being part of something that matters to you, whatever it is, that gives our life purpose, and purpose is terrific for our mental health. It helps reduce the risk of cognitive decline associated with dementia, and so many benefits of it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And, it doesn't have to be your grandchildren. It doesn't have to be, like you're saying, there's so many ways to find that purpose and to interact with young people and people who inspire you and get you, inspire that passion in you to go out and be active. And I think everyone should strive for more of those kinds of interactions.
And so what advice do you have, or recommendations do you have for grandmothers or grandfathers to really kind of maximize the benefit of what we've talked about here today?
I think in general, just, kind of from what I've seen, every study seems to indicate that social behavior, social interaction is the best predictor of healthy aging. And so, whether that's because of these genetic drivers that I've been talking about, or, all the other benefits of this social interaction, I think get out there, be as social as you can, in that way, or getting out of your comfort zone, maybe, because maybe it's a lot more comfortable not to put yourself out there at a certain point. I know even for myself, there are days where it's like, I just want to hang out at home, which is also okay. But, remembering that actually you'll probably feel better after you go out and interact socially. And it's going to not only benefit you, but the people around you. So I think, it's think of yourself as an active driver of your own health, and continue to find ways to improve your health.
I think that's so important. The social interaction is the best indicator of healthy aging. Everyone write that down. I wrote it down. Really, really important. And this aligns with the Harvard study on longevity. I don't know if that's what it's called, but they studied Harvard men and then those who didn't go to Harvard. And they only studied men, because I think only men were at Harvard at the time. And they studied them for their lifespan, and into their 90s. And now I think they're studying their children. The men who lived the longest, the men who were the healthiest, it wasn't the most money, it wasn't the most success, it wasn't the most anything. It was those who had the healthiest relationship with their spouse, right? So the research on social support, women are very good at social support. Women have large social networks where they get their social support. Great research from Umberson at the University of Texas on this. And men, they basically got their wife. If they're straight, If they're gay, I don't know what social networks are like for gay men. But straight men, they got one person. It's their wife. That's who they talk to about everything. If you're married to a straight man, you know what I'm talking about. You're his rock. You're what he needs to be socially healthy. They don't talk to their other men friends about, hey, I had this challenging thing. I just want to talk to somebody. Men generally don't do that. And so for these Harvard men, it was, how good is your relationship with your spouse, which is basically kind of what's your social support, what's your social support level with the most important person in your life. And I love how it shows how important that is, because it's something we can do for free, and it contributes meaning and purpose in our lives, and improves our health. And it's one of the reasons why we're here. I think one of the reasons we're here on planet Earth and we have language and emotions is to experience those things in a positive way and experience love and joy with others.
And I will say that, I've talked a lot about women. I certainly don't want to leave men out. But when I talk about grandmothers, of course, there's always grandfathers too. And, they play a wonderful role in the lives of their children and grandchildren. And the only reason I have focused on women as I've been talking about some of this today is because in a lot of the traditional kind of discussions of these topics, women are left out. When we think of, survival of the fittest, we usually think about men. And so I think it's just interesting to kind of think about women's role in that as well. But yeah, it is very interesting to think about how all of this plays out for men, and everything seems to indicate that these healthy social relationships are just so crucial for everyone.
And I absolutely love this, because you're absolutely right. It's usually the evolution is looking at, okay, how many children can a man have? Which is, you can study Genghis Khan and see, okay, man with a lot of power, a whole lot of children, great evolutionary success. It's harder. It's hard to study women on that level. But this idea of, listen, if you're a grandmother, you can really have a major impact. You can improve the health of your children, or your grandchildren, pardon me, and your children by being there, by being of support, because goodness knows raising children is not easy. Single family homes, I don't think, are effective, because it's hard to raise children just with two adults. You need those grandparents in there to be of help, so you can improve the health of your child, your son or daughter, so they can have more children, right? That helps. And the grandchildren you have are going to be healthier because there's less stress and more love and more help in the home, so the children can grow up healthier. So this is a tremendous message of hope and purpose for grandparents to be more active in the roles and understand you're not only doing something fulfilling that's good for you, but it's also good for your child, and it's really good for your grandchildren to be in a supportive, loving home.
Absolutely.
This is fantastic. Well, Dr. Ilardo, thank you so much for being here. This has just been wonderful.
Oh, it's been fantastic to talk to you. Thank you so much.